The American Civil War wasn't just fought on battlefields with rifles and cannons. It was waged in counting houses, banks, and trading floors across two continents, with cotton as both weapon and currency, in a brutal economic conflict that would reshape global finance forever. By 1860, cotton wasn't merely America's most valuable export. It was the oil of the 19th century, the indispensable raw material that powered the textile mills of England and France, employed millions of workers from Manchester to Lyon, and generated more wealth than any other commodity on earth. The South produced nearly 2 billion pounds of cotton annually, representing two-thirds of the world's supply and 60% of American exports, creating what Southern politicians called King Cotton, a monopoly so powerful they believed it made their region economically invincible and diplomatically untouchable. When South Carolina seceded in December 1860, followed by 10 other states, Confederate leaders weren't simply gambling on military victory. They were executing a calculated financial strategy based on cotton diplomacy, convinced that Britain and France, desperate to keep their textile industries running and their working classes employed, would be forced to recognize Confederate independence, break the Union naval blockade, and possibly even intervene militarily to secure cotton supplies. The Confederacy initially withheld cotton from European markets as leverage and embargo strategy that spectacularly backfired as European powers, particularly Britain, had stockpiled massive cotton reserves during the bumper crop years of 1859 and 1860. And when shortages did emerge, British merchants developed alternative sources in Egypt and India, while workers, despite unemployment and suffering during the cotton famine, largely supported the Union cause due to moral opposition to slavery. Meanwhile, the Union implemented the Anaconda Plan, a massive naval blockade that eventually deployed over 600 ships to strangle southern ports. And while Confederate blockade runners managed to slip through with some cotton exports, the South's ability to convert its white gold into war materials, medications, and manufactured goods was catastrophically constrained. With cotton that sold for 10 cents per pound in 1860, rotting in warehouses while prices in Europe soared to heights that did the Confederacy no good whatsoever. The financial dimensions of this conflict extended far beyond cotton trade. The Union and Confederacy fought a parallel war for international credit and legitimacy, with Confederate agents attempting to secure loans from European banks using future cotton deliveries as collateral through schemes like the Erlanger Loan of 1863, which initially raised $15 million, but ultimately failed as Union military victories diminished confidence in Confederate bonds, while the North, under Treasury Secretary Salmon Chase, revolutionized American finance by creating a national banking system, issuing greenback paper currency, and selling hundreds of millions in government bonds to ordinary citizens through the financial genius Jay Cooke, who pioneered modern bond marketing techniques. The cotton trade itself became a murky world of speculation, corruption, and moral compromise. As Union-occupied territories like Memphis and New Orleans became centers for a controversial trade in Confederate cotton, with Northern merchants, often with tacit government approval, purchasing cotton from Southern planters and smuggling it through lines, creating a shadowy economy that enriched speculators while technically aiding the Confederate war effort, leading President Lincoln to navigate the impossible contradiction between maintaining moral clarity about the war's purposes while needing cotton exports to help finance Union operations and maintain Northern industrial activity. The Confederacy's King Cotton strategy ultimately represented one of history's greatest miscalculations of economic power. Southern leaders had fundamentally misunderstood that Britain's decision-making would be driven not by economic necessity alone, but by moral revulsion against slavery, particularly after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation transformed the war's character. by British strategic calculations that supporting Southern independence might encourage secessionist movements in Canada and Ireland, and by the fact that Lancashire mill workers, despite devastating unemployment, held massive demonstrations supporting the Union cause and opposing recognition of the slave-holding Confederacy. As the war progressed, the financial imbalance became crushing. The North's industrial economy, population of 22 million, and ability to tax and borrow, gave it access to approximately $25 billion in revenues during the war, while the Confederacy, with 9 million people, including nearly 4 million enslaved persons, raised perhaps $1 billion through increasingly worthless paper money bonds nobody wanted and taxes in kind, that impoverished its own citizens, creating a hyperinflationary spiral, where Confederate currency that started at 90 cents to the Union dollar ended the war at less than 2 cents, effectively bankrupting the Southern war effort before the military collapse was complete. The cotton factor, those powerful merchants who had controlled credit commerce and the entire plantation economy before the war, saw their world disintegrate as their commodity lost its geopolitical power, their credit networks collapsed, their British connections proved unreliable, and the enslaved labor system that had made mass cotton production profitable was destroyed, taking with it the entire financial architecture of the Plantation South. The war's outcome proved that in modern industrial conflict, financial depth matters as much as battlefield courage. The North's ability to mobilize capital, create new monetary instruments, maintain international credit, and sustain complex supply chains ultimately proved as decisive as Grant's generalship or Sherman's march, demonstrating that wars between nations are increasingly won in treasuries and counting houses before they're settled on battlefields. The irony was profound. Cotton, which Southern leaders believed made them masters of the global economy and guaranteed their independence, instead became a prison that locked them into an obsolete economic system based on enslaved labor, prevented industrial diversification, created dangerous dependence on foreign manufacturing, and blinded them to the reality that the future belonged not to agricultural commodities, however valuable, but to industrial production, financial innovation, and free labor systems that could adapt to technological change. When Lee surrendered at Appomattox, the Confederacy didn't just lose a military conflict. It lost a financial war it had been losing since 1862, when it became clear that King Cotton was a pretender whose throne rested on miscalculation, that European powers would prioritize political and moral considerations over cotton supplies, and that the North's financial resources, institutional depth, and economic dynamism would simply overwhelm the South's one-crop economy, no matter how valuable that crop had once been, leaving us with the enduring lesson that economic power derives not from controlling a single commodity, but from the complex interplay of industrial capacity, financial sophistication, human capital, and the ability to innovate under pressure.